We forgot to ask you to do something. I want you to introduce yourself. I'm Adele Oppenheim. I'm 90 years one years old, and blah 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 blah. One sentence.
I can do whatever the fuck
I can do whatever the fuck I want. Yeah. Right.
And that's what you. I'm not going to say.
You don't have to. No, you can say whatever you want. I'm Adele Oppenheim. I'm 91 years old, and one quick sentence. I'm Adele Oppenheim.
I'm Adele Oppenheim. I'm 91 years old, and finally, at this stage of my life, I feel like a grown-up, a full grown-up.
Took a while, didn't it?
Yes, it did, and I'm still on the route. I'm still growing up. Just a second, I gotta look at the mirror now and be sure that I'm satisfied. Oh, phooey. I'm not satisfied.
No. What's the problem?
My hair.
Yeah,
What do you think is the problem? It's always the problem.
How does it feel to have the two of us sitting and asking you questions?
It feels lovely, yes. For once you want to hear what I have to say. And that's...
He's been listening to you with more politesse.
I mean, and it's good to have Alan here for many reasons, but one, he will be a bit of a correction to you.
Can you tell me something about your history with this guy?
Well, my history with this guy begins when I'm a very close friend with his mother, with Sally, yes. And my history begins when we were together at some event, and I was very excited to tell her that I was pregnant. And she looked at me and told me that she too was pregnant.
Ooh.
So we lived in an apartment around the corner from where Sally and Alan's family lived. And there was a knock on my door. And I opened the door. And there was Alan's dad, hi, smiling and telling me that Sally was at Julie Dickinson Hospital in Northampton and that Alan had been born.
At some point, you two started to have a stronger adult connection, and that's when I started calling him your boyfriend.
Yes.
So when did that happen?
Well, I guess it was in my 80s.
To be honest with you, I don't remember how this happened and what.
Well, I think you just started seeing my mother by yourself.
Yeah.
Yes,
You know,
yes, you began visiting me on your own, and we were having, a very different relationship, an adult relationship. Yeah. And I was very delighted, yes.
You know, my friendship with family friends, Joanne, I mean, part of it is widowhood, I think. Is that
Yes.
would I have visited you when you were,
With Henry?
Yeah, I did when Henry was ill, but
It created one-on-one time.
it was more one-on-one.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes. And so it was a different relationship,
Yeah.
and I very much enjoyed it. And I would let Keith know how adult it was and how responsive you were to me and how well you treated me.
It was nauseating. There's a photo of you and Al, and you are hugging him like there's no better thing on earth.
Yes, and you were so envious. I have very little of my own family history. And my mother died when I was 6 years old, so I have very few memories of her partly because I was so young, and partly because in that culture, in that world, people who were grieving, were mourning, which they were doing so frequently because they had so many losses in their lives, they did not speak of their grief. They did not speak of my mother, and I know so little about her. And there were so many questions that I would want to ask my father that I did not ask him because he clearly did not want to be asked. And if I did ask, if I would say, "Where is she?" he would just respond very minimally and look in pain, so I learned not to ask.
One of the things about your memoir that stood out for me was when you said how little documentation there is, too. Almost no photographs. Are there no photographs of you and your mother?
No, and that's a question I have. How come? I can't believe that my father, who, got this Brownie camera, which for him was, an American acquisition. He loved taking photos, and you've seen the photos of me. I cannot believe that he did not take photos of my mother and me.
Is it possible that your step-grandmother destroyed them?
That's my theory. That she basically wanted to destroy my mother's existence. She would actually tell people how she had given birth to me. And I could never mention my mother. If she was really angry with me and rejecting of me, she would call me Selma's daughter. It was also an abandonment of her. In other words, she was saying, she's not my mother, and I don't have a mother. And that to me was the worst feeling in the world. Yes. Yeah. So I believe she must have destroyed them. I grew up among first-generation immigrants and their parents. And in my entire life, even though I've moved, away from physically away from all of that, almost all of my friends, until recently, have been Jewish. And it's not that I would not have wanted other friends, but that's the world I lived in.
Yeah. And do you feel American?
Oh, I definitely feel American, but I feel my identity is Jewish American woman.
Is there a moment when you feel, is there a switch that went off where you felt at a certain age, I'm an American?
Now, I felt it from early on because, my parents were so overjoyed to be American and very much idealized America and were thrilled to be raising an American child. Yeah.
So I might make fun of you that you're not American, but your parents saw you as...
Oh, yes.
The American.
I was the American child who would have the opportunities and the privileges that they lacked. And that's what that's what they wanted for me. His name was Elias, and I learned that he was descended from Elias Crozer, who was the brother of the wife of the Gaon of Vilna.
This is in the 1700s, right?
Yes.
So we're talking probably at least 5 generations, something like that?
Right, right. And as you well know, the Gaon, that means wise man, and Vilna was Vilna in Lithuania. And the Gaon was known through the ages as the greatest example of wisdom. And Elias the first Elias, was a businessman. So my father carried all of that, I think, all of that. And his father, who was known as a Rebbe, he was not a rabbi, but he was very, very prominent in their shul. And he came from
Outside of Riga.
he came from a small town, a shtetl called Zablon, 17 miles from Riga. And Zablon was 95% Jewish. So he grew up in that world, and he said he was not really close to his father because his father was davening and studying all the time. That was his world. But the connection to his father taught him the Talmud. And he studied, my father studied the Talmud all his life. So I think his inner world was very grounded in a sense.
You're 91, but you know, in your dad's generation, people just didn't live that long. And when he was a teenager, both of his parents died. That's essentially what got him to come to the United States.
Well, it was that his parents died, that, you know, he was highly, highly intelligent. And Jews could not go to, you know, non-Jewish schools. And he yearned to learn and mathematics, and all of that it was denied him. And there was not very much left for him anymore. So at age 19, all alone, he migrated to the United States where his older brother Sam and his older sister Anna were living. And one of my many, many questions is, how did he get here? I would assume that he traveled steerage. I don't think, you know, in the ship, which was very, very arduous, but I don't know. I also don't know what he did when he came here because they were not in a position to help him. He was all alone. What I do know is that he tried to enroll in Cooper Union, which at that time was known for educating potential engineers. He wanted to be an engineer, but he dropped out because engineers, you know, there were no positions for engineers, and certainly not for Jews. And I don't know what he did, or how he earned a living, or how he managed until the early 30s. That's my memory, when he took an exam for a position in the U.S. Post Office. And it was a very demanding exam, and not many people passed it. He passed it, and he got a job in the U.S. Post Office in Manhattan, which was the post office.
Grand Central Station.
Grand Central Station, the post office in the United States. And he had an income and a pension for life. And that's when I remember when he and my mother were happy because they now were able to move from their little apartment over the candy store on Avenue U to an apartment on Ocean Avenue, a newly built apartment house, and it was like the realization of their dreams. And it was very hard work. He was not a mailman. He worked in the post office, and it meant carrying, transporting huge sacks of mail, and which were heavy and physically demanding. Right. He worked with Gentile men who were sort of lower class, not educated, not intellectual, and was not at all comfortable with them. And he took the late evening shift because that paid more than the daytime shift. So he would go to work later in the afternoon and come home like midnight or 1 o'clock and walk from the subway.
And that description sort of matches with this bigger idea, which is that Eli was often an intellectual mismatch with his environments, with the post office, with your family. He, in some
With
ways,
my mother's family.
with your mother's family, and I assume Bubby's family too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that he's in some ways kind of a misfit in a lot of his life.
Yeah, I think of that a lot, how alone he must have felt, because he did not, fit in with my mother's family at all, as far as I know. But he found his world, as you know, in the Verband. And the Verband was was part of what's called the Jewish National Workers Alliance, and this was formed by a group of Landsman, of people who came from his world, and they were all men, of course, and spoke Yiddish, and this was his deepest sort of connection, where he was really seen for who he was and highly regarded.
What kind of intellectual was he? Was it a rejection of religion or a continuation in a sense?
Well, it was a rejection, I think, of his father's version of religion. It was not a religion that kept him in some ways separate from, say, certainly from other people and certainly from his child. He certainly carried a lot with him, internally and otherwise, and was very strict in terms of, one, keeping kosher, two, marrying Jewish. He was not happy that I was marrying a German Jew, even though he got to love Henry eventually, but marrying an American, he said to me, "Why don't you marry an American?" Meaning an American of Eastern Jewish descent. Certainly no sex before marriage. And he wanted me to have an education, but I was to behave. Once he thought I was wearing rouge, I wasn't. It just my cheeks got red, and he got quite upset with me because that would make me, the Yiddish word is like a chunta. And then my Aunt Tessie would take me to Chinese restaurants where we ate, God forbid, roast pork. He was horrified. And in terms of his relationship to God, it was not the unambivalent devotion to Gottenu. He said, "I believe in God, but I don't trust him," which really captured him, that ironic sense of humor. And it was painful, really, because he had no reason to trust him with all the, the traumas that occurred in his life.
But that is actually kind of a very Jewish
Yes.
point of view. I believe in God, I don't trust him.
Yes, yes. And said with humor.
Yeah.
And that's very much Eastern Jewish.
Right.
Yeah.
You can be in the faith, but you cannot rely on your faith to solve the crises around you.
Yeah. Whereas the Orthodox, the serious Orthodox, believe that God ordained everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
The sense of humor was ever present, or it only came out in certain moments with him?
I think
or not at all.
Oh no, he had a sense of humor, definitely, but it came out at certain moments. I think I think a lot of the time he was depressed, but the sense of humor saved him. Just the way the bantering with Keith, it lifts you up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's part of Jewishness, of Yiddishkeit, that you maintain your humor. My mother was Sonia Itzkanovna Persevich. Sonia, the daughter of Yitzchak. And Persevich was their Russian name. She came from a small town in the Ukraine, Kobylyanki.
Did your mother speak Russian in school and in official capacities, but basically did the family speak Yiddish?
Yes. My mother went to the gymnasium, which was not very typical for a woman, and certainly for a Jewish woman. So I don't know exactly how that happened, except I've heard that her uncle had been an esteemed physician in the town. So she may have had that way of entree. So she's placed very high in her class. I have the report card. And she's studied, physics and calligraphy, handwriting, language, and needlework. So she was great at sewing.
Was your mother from a big city, a little town? Was
She's from a little town. Tobayaki was a little town.
Yeah. Similar to what your father came from, or?
Well, it was different. It was Russian. It wasn't all Jewish. I think they both experienced a lot of oppression and pogroms, so there was a similarity. Her father was a different father. He was a businessman, and he went to Odessa, which was, the big city. So she had a different...
More worldly.
More worldly, yes, more worldly.
Your mother, the intention at one point was for her to go to medical school?
That's my understanding. And I could never understand that until I found out years later that her uncle had been a doctor. So that must have been the model. Okay. And it was very unusual for a woman, and certainly a Jewish woman, to go to medical school.
But that didn't happen?
No, it didn't happen because they left. They came to the United States.
Why did they leave?
Well, the story I heard was that they first came in 1905, and that it was very difficult here, not what they expected in terms of, earning a living and all of that, and that they went back. And apparently some Jews did go back. And when they went back, her father, Yitzchak, died. And life was not tenable. So Granny, her mother, came then to the United States, a widow with my mother. My mother was the oldest daughter, and there was an older brother, Izzy Israel. And the youngest was my Aunt Tessie, age 10, and there were two brothers, Eli and Harry, younger than my mother. And they came in 1922. In 1924, there were extremely strict quotas against people from Eastern Europe, not only Jews, but certainly Jews, Italians, Greeks, and so on. They never could have gotten here.
They got here in the nick of time.
And if they had not gotten here, we would not exist.
It seems to me that both Eli and Selma came from worlds where there was harsh anti-Semitism.
Yes.
But that's not the main reason why either of them came to the U.S. I think it had more to do with economic circumstances.
It had to do with both. Oh, it definitely had to do with oppression. My father did tell me once that a pogrom in the village, and he remembers hiding like under the bed and being terrified. So, oh yes, it was definitely anti-Semitism, but also lack of opportunity.
Did he ever talk about the pogrom in any detail, like how it started?
No, never did.
Yeah.
And of course, I never asked. Which is, I said, why didn't I ask?
How did your parents meet?
Well, in those days, if you didn't go to a matchmaker, a shadchan, you invariably met through people in the community who knew you. So the way they met was that Olga, Russian name, my granny's sister, had, I think she'd been a girlfriend of my Uncle Sam, my father's older brother. But at any rate, I was born in 1929, my mother got here in 1922, so somewhere along the line they met and got married.
Do you think your parents were in love?
Yes, I do. I do.
How do you know that?
Well, this is what I know. My mother was the ultimate, what they call a beria, a balabusta. In those days, this was the ideal Jewish wife. And she was very, very social and loved making parties for family, for friends. And I think this meant a great deal to my father, who had, he had left family behind. He had two sisters and a brother who were ultimately murdered in the war. And I remember his satisfaction, and I remember her serving food and his eating with pleasure. And he then, because he was eating so much, in Europe they were starving, he developed a belly, which he called his corporation. He was very proud of it. He was always reading his newspaper, the New York Daily Post and the Yiddish Der Tag. So he's in his chair reading his newspaper. She's in her chair darning his socks. That's my memory. And they were very happy with that. And I do remember his joy at these family parties.
Was there any parental disapproval of their marriage or any other family?
I don't think his family disapproved of her at all, as far as I know, because I remember how devastated they were at the Shiva. How her family felt about him. He must have been, very strange to them. Yes, that he was so different from them, and they were so different from him. And he didn't approve of my grandmother at all. Yeah.
And you've sort of come to also realize later in life that there were more differences between them, or you've thought about that more, right?
Well, I wondered about them. I have little teeny memories of tension. I don't know what the tension was about. And I never really thought about it until recently, when my friend Jane pointed out that I have idealized her, which I have, because I don't know what her limitations were.
And she died when you were 6?
6. I was 6.
So what else could you do but idealize somebody?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she was extremely loving to me. That I know, and very comfortable and happy with motherhood.
Do you know if they wanted to have more children, or?
I think they did, and I had some sense, and I could be wrong, but I think I had some sense that she was pregnant when she died. And I think they very much wanted more children because, one, they both so loved children, and it was very important to, after all the losses, to raise children. America, yeah.
So let's go there. You're 6 years old.
Yeah.
What's happening with your mother before she dies?
Well, I think I did have some awareness that she wasn't quite well, but nothing to the extent that it was. So when I remember, and this is the only time I can hear my mother's voice and what she said, I hear her calling Eli. And then the light is on, and I fall asleep, and the next thing I see is that he's brought her a shissel, a bowl, and she's vomiting into the shissel, and she's vomiting blood, and he's looking panic-stricken. And the next thing I remember is he has somehow gotten an older woman, a neighbor who my mother was very close to, Mrs. Friedman. She was there, and he had somehow gotten the doctor to come to the house, and the doctor was looking very, very serious. Today she'd be in a hospital, and maybe she could have been saved, although in those days probably not. And the next thing I remember is I'm waking up, and she is in a coma. She is, still, and he's obviously has gotten my Aunt Tessie to come, and they're both standing at the bed looking so grief-stricken.
Are you allowed to get near?
No. And the next thing I remember, they sent me to a neighbor's down the hall that I shouldn't be in the house. We didn't have a telephone, but there would be wall telephones in the hallway, and he was standing at the telephone, obviously calling family and weeping. And he held me, and we're weeping. And then I'm going to the neighbors, and there I am. I don't know what's going on. Nobody's talking to me. Nobody's looking at me, anything. And the next thing, my Aunt Tessie comes in because the neighbors have a phone, and she said, "I've told everybody, now I have to call my mother." And then she leaves. She doesn't pay any attention to me, which was very unusual for her. And finally, I just can't stand it anymore. And I go back to the apartment. When I'm standing out the door, I hear all this weeping. So she's already dead. And when I come in, I go into the living room, and their family there already. Everybody is grief-stricken. And I realize, she's gone. And I remember how I felt. I felt utterly alone. Nobody hugs me, nobody tells me anything. And the next thing I remember is the shiva, and my Uncle Sam is there from the Bronx, silent, deeply upset, obviously. They're all sitting around crying, when they're sitting the way they did in shiva in those days. And I walk around comforting the adults.
It's communicated to you that they really don't want you to ask.
They don't want me to ask. And when I think about it, they left people behind. My father left, 3 siblings, many friends, a whole world. They all died. This I remember, they were writing letters to the family, and finally the letters stopped. So they knew that they had died. So it was enormous grief and loss. And the way they dealt with it was to not talk about it, because talking brought up such enormous grief that it was unbearable. And they had to keep going. And that's what they did.
So was there actually a lot of time in which you weren't sure whether your mother, or did you know and not know at the same time?
Exactly. I knew and not know. I remember one of my distinct memories is asking my father, "Where is she?" And he would say, and he would get very tense and very upset, "In the hospital." And I would say, "When is she coming home?" And he said, "Soon or in a while," and then he would clam up.
And that was within days or weeks?
It was it was more than days. Yeah, more than days. And she died in March, and my cousins from the Bronx visited us several months later in the spring, and we were sitting this is my Aunt Tessie's living room, and what I remember was my Aunt Tessie was sitting like across the room, farther from me than you are, and my cousins, and they were talking about my mother. And they were talking about her as someone who had died. And then I asked my Aunt Tessie the question, and she just said, "She died." I think I asked what happened, and she said she died. That was it. She didn't, hug me. Nobody ever consoled me, and they wouldn't talk about her.
Why did you go to Aunt Tessie's first? Why did you go to your mother's family and not just go straight to your father's family?
Well, my mother died on March 18th, 1935. So that's 2 months after my 6th birthday. And it was very sudden. There was no preparation for it. So I think there were essentially Economic issues. You know, money was very tight. My father did not want to have to stay there another month and pay rent. And there was a big issue about me. He worked evenings. You didn't hire babysitters in those days. And I didn't know my father's family. You know, the Bronx was, for us, very far away. I was very close to Tessie. I loved her. She loved me. She was 24 years old at the time. She had married a furrier, so that meant a step up in the socioeconomic scale. And they had a two-bedroom apartment in a very nice house, and a live-in maid, Henrietta, from Iowa. So we took Henrietta's bedroom. And Henrietta then had to sleep in the hallway on a fold-up cot. So for my Aunt Tessie, who has, you know, a maid and she can, you know, live an easy life, all of a sudden, she loved me, but having two babies, a brother-in-law who was depressed, who she would, I don't think they were in conflict, but they were so different, who reminded her of her sister. So she would often leave and go to her mother's where they were playing cards. And there I was left with Henrietta and my cousin, Ian. And Henrietta was very resentful of me.
Did you see Henrietta like as a person to be talked to?
Oh, no, absolutely not. She was somebody who was supposed to take me to school, and she would always get me there late, and then because it was quite a long walk, and then I would be charged with tardiness. She was supposed to feed me cod liver oil, which was essential, and she'd be chasing me around the kitchen because I hated it, and she would finally get it into my mouth. No, she was not friendly at all. Yeah. And she must have been depressed too and angry. And what I do remember about her, would take her suitcase and be walking out the door, and she was going to take off to her sugar daddy.
Sugar daddy.
I think she was, you know, like 16 years old or something, because this is the Depression, and the families could not support their children.
I want to talk about your grandmother. She's got a card playing thing going on?
Well, you smile at that, and I always was embarrassed, ashamed of it. My father was very disapproving of it. But now I know from what I have read that the immigrant women of that generation, they came here and they had to continue, their domestic life and caring for their children and all of that. But they also, she had lost her husband. She had to have an income. So she found Yankala, who was a widower and also was looking for a wife to, take care of his domestic life and his sex life and all of that. In terms of her skills and her means of earning money, they were very limited. She didn't have an education, etc. But she certainly knew how to play cards. And card playing was very popular among the
Russian Jewish women.
Yeah, the Eastern Jews. And there was a big dining room table, and the women who, by now, the children were off to school, so they had some free time. Their domestic duties were done for the morning. They had some free time, so they would come to Granny's apartment, sit around the dining room table. She would serve them the Russian way, tea in a glass with lemon. They would play rummy, and my memory is they would get into big fights as to who won, screaming at each other and all of that. My father didn't want me to go there. He felt it was a very corrupting influence. And then in the evening, the husbands would come, and they would play pinochle, and they would smoke cigarettes, and also drink tea. And she got this, there was some earnings from this.
Isn't it true, though, that they're all Eastern Jews, but in some ways this shows how Zeta and the Pierces are different kinds of Eastern Jews?
Well, we are all members of tribes. And among Jews, there were different tribes. And they definitely were from very different tribes.
What are the two tribes that you're talking about? What's the
Well,
tribal difference?
my father, Zeta, as you know, came from a very deeply Talmudic tradition. And, you know, he was basically, I mean, he was a very connecting person in many ways, but he was much more introverted.
And into intellectual content.
Very intellectual content. You know, avidly read the newspaper, avidly studied the Talmud. But he was always studying. He learned how to use cameras. In order to add to the income, when my mother was still alive, he bought what's a hem stitching machine, it was a sewing machine that stitched hems. And in those days, when people, you know, the women didn't even have time or didn't know how to do it, he would, that was a sort of a little bit of a side business. So he was always studying and always learning. He was very interested in technology. I think I'm either in second or third grade when we move. So then he tricked me. And he told me that we were going to Prospect Park. That's when I would take the subway happily. I loved Prospect Park. I loved going on the swings and seeing the animals in the zoo. Prospect Park was a few stations away. The Bronx was about an hour and a half away. So we were on the subway, and I would keep saying, why aren't we there? Why aren't we there? And he said, Prospect Park moved. So I didn't get, you know, I didn't go into my state. But then the first thing he did when we got off at the station in the Bronx, he took me to my uncle's store, because that's where they were during the day. And as soon as I saw my uncle, I got very upset. And I turned to my father, and I put my head in his jacket and covered my face and didn't want to greet them.
Because you knew this was the beginning of the
I
movie
knew, I understood.
I mean,
Even though I wasn't told that, I understood.
It all speaks to this kind of nonverbal communication between you and your father.
Yes, a lot of it. So they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and they had 3 daughters. So they had 1 bedroom, my Uncle Sam and my Aunt Yetta. My Aunt Yetta, she had to cook and feed all 7 people, and everything had to be cooked from scratch, and everything had to be cooked from vegetables that did not sell in the store. And she was not a good cook. The rule was that you had to eat everything that was fed to you, whether you liked it or not, so that you would not get sick. And you were reminded, if you objected, that the children in Europe were starving. So at my Aunt Yetta's, Henrietta had a see to it that I was forced to eat hot cereal this is by Uncle Martin's rule, which I hated. And at my Aunt Yetta's, I had to eat all these very large meals with all these cooked, shredded vegetables like beets and so on. So eating had been the greatest pleasure, and food was love with my mother, who was a wonderful cook and baker and cooked to my taste. Eating became a torment. And my Aunt Yetta, she had to do all the cooking. The daughters had to help with the cleaning. Mid-afternoon, she had to go and work in the store so that Uncle Sam, who had been up at 3 in the morning, could come home and have his meal and a rest. So she certainly didn't have time to mother me. I mean, she was kind to me, but she didn't have time to mother her own children. this is how I met Sesha, my stepmother. We lived in a two-story house. The Swings lived on the ground floor, and above us lived the Kornblaus, who were the landlords. And Sesha was a boarder at the Kornblaus. She was not married, which is a great disgrace to be, quote, an old maid. And she was working for her younger brother, Seymour, who owned a dress store in the South Bronx. So this must have been one of her days off, and she was walking the Kornblau's dog, whose name was Snunny. And Snunny was on a leash, and he was a little white, short-haired dog with brown spots. And as she was walking Snunny with the leash, I guess I was looking, very interested. And she said to me, would you like, she got it, she understood it. And she said, would you like to walk her? And I was so happy, and I took the leash. So, as we formed a relationship, she then met my Aunt Yetta, and my Aunt Yetta invited her in, and eventually she obviously met my father, and that was the beginning.
Was the first time that you really started to get a taste of how disturbed Bubby was after she and Eli got married?
Oh, absolutely.
So what happened?
Well, it happened, I remember the first moment, which was we would go home from school for lunch, and I was very happy to be going home to lunch and not to my Aunt Yetta's horrible lunches, and to a mama who was going to make me my lunch. And where was she? She was wandering around the street. She wasn't even there. He hadn't made my lunch, nothing. And I remember that feeling that something was wrong.
So take it a step further. What was wrong?
Well, what I soon discovered, that there was this wonderful mama who at times could be, attentive and fun and playful and caring,
Yeah.
who would turn into what I thought of as the Black Witch, who would become absolutely crazy, ranting, abusive, and non-functional, who would not be cooking or cleaning or there, who would leave the house and be gone, and particularly ranting against my father, whom she came to believe, and she was very paranoid, and she totally believed that he was having an affair with my best friend Shirley's mother, which of course he was not, and I had to end my friendship with Shirley.
So she was always developing these paranoid stories.
Yes.
Right. And why, she's a damaged person from her background, and this is how she rolls?
Well, and this comes to me very late in life, this understanding, which I was incapable of. One, they lived in a little village in Poland where they were the only Jewish family. So they were at great risk. And her father worked for the Graf, which was, the Graf was the
count.
Yeah, so, or at least they refer to him as the Graf. So on the one hand, he had a certain, degree of income and status, but very perilous. They were Jews, they were very, very perilous. So what she would tell me, and she must have been a very pretty child and an appealing child, was that the Galach, the local priest, the Galach, would often hold her on his lap, and that she worried that she might be pregnant. So obviously something went on. I don't know what, but it could have been very traumatic. It had to be very traumatic. I don't know whether she told her parents or not. I don't know. But even if she had, they would not have done anything. Her mother was very narcissistic, very cold. She probably was a difficult child. She was mentally ill. She was paranoid. She was what we would called today probably bipolar, borderline, and then of course there was a whole history of trauma. And I think that the paranoia about my father's affair, and this just occurred to me, was that she knew at some deep level, she had to know that he loved Selma, my mother, more than he loved her. And that she in no way measured up to Selma. She didn't know how to be a housewife. She didn't know how to cook. Her mother obviously hadn't taught her that. She didn't know what a woman was supposed to know. She had the shame of being an old maid. And she didn't know how to be a mother. And Selma did. And she would refer to herself as the best mother in the world. So I think the paranoia about Shirley's mother really was about Selma. I remember, this is, early on, I remember walking home from school at lunchtime, for lunch, and as I was walking, I would say a prayer. Please, God, don't let Mommy be mad at Daddy. Because sometimes I'd go home and she'd be in the midst of a storm, and it was horrible.
She was unpredictable.
Oh, she was totally unpredictable. She could be the good, loving mama 1 minute, and also good to Zeta too. 1 minute, and the next minute she was violent and mad.
I'm going to go forward in time a lot, and I'm going to tell you the story.
Yeah.
Because you know it well. I'm 10 years old. I'm back from camp. I'm taking a bath, and it's a bubble bath, so you can't see me, but you come into the bathroom, and you started to talk to me while I'm in this bubble bath, and I'm age 10. And you told me that she's not my real grandmother for the first time. Why did you wait that long?
Well, that's one of the many moments I regret. Not that I told you, but the way I told you. I mean, while you were in the bath was weird.
I'll say.
The question could be, why did you not wait longer, or why was it that moment? It could have been earlier. It could have...
I know.
I was a captive audience. That's
And I can't fully answer it. I can't, but I can just surmise. I think what happened for years, I kept her secret. Your mom did not know. No, none of my friends knew. My children, nobody knew. It's like living under a tyrant. I mean, I didn't have my own voice. I had to speak in her voice.
Why do you think your father put up with this kind of behavior?
Well, first of all, divorce was absolutely forbidden in that tradition. Secondly, even if he had, divorced her, it would have financially been more than he could have afforded, and that was very crucial. And then who would take care of me? How would that have worked out? All of that. I see as his great one flaw that I know of was his passivity. But culturally, men from that culture often had to be passive because they lived in a very dangerous world, and if they spoke up, they could have been killed.
It would be hard for you to answer this because you were so young.
Yes.
But basically what I'm asking is, how long did the honeymoon last? Did he realize very early on that this
early on.
Yeah.
Right. Early on.
Not long.
As soon as we had moved, she was free to be the witch. And she was either the witch or just, taking off, doing her own thing. And I often felt very abandoned. There was no question that I was going to go to college, which was a very big thing for that generation of Jews to have, that your child could go to college. And at that time, there were 4 New York City colleges: Hunter, City, where your dad went, Brooklyn, and Queens. Hunter was all women, and all the city colleges claimed that they were free, that free free tuition for any student who lived in the city who was eligible, who passed the entrance requirements, which was not true because they were only open to white students. But Hunter had many, many Jewish students because, like me, Jewish kids were in the honor school. They had all the preparation to make it. And I did not want to go to Hunter. I did not want to go to a women's college. I wanted a boyfriend. And how was I going to find a boyfriend at Hunter College? At that time, it was right after the war, there was a Bronx campus, and I loved it. I loved it. I mean, there was grass. I didn't know from grass that we were only about, we were only just the entering class, just us. So there were like 200 students, separate buildings. You could walk around, and professors, and often them younger instructors who were sent to the Bronx, who were really interested in us personally. I had friends now who had similar interests as me, as I did. And we were in downtown Manhattan, and I had started this in high school, going to the theater, which in those days you could, for $1.10, you could get a seat in the top balcony. We went to musicals, we went to serious plays, we went to the opera. That was my world, and that was a world that was extremely, extremely gratifying.
Tell the story of how you and Henry met.
What happened was, this was the end of my junior year. I was about to enter my senior year at Hunter, and I was feeling very anxious. I thought I was going to apply to Columbia, to go to graduate school in Columbia, to be a teacher, but I didn't really know what I wanted to be. And my main anxiety was a boyfriend. So it just happened that Bubby wanted to go on a vacation. She was again mad at my father with her whole shtick, and she wanted to go with me. She didn't want to go alone. And Anita, her niece Anita, who was an aspiring travel agent, told her about the Palace Hotel in Fleischman's, New York. This is in the Catskills. So Henry, he has graduated from City College, and he is about to go to the University of North Carolina to study clinical psychology. And this is going to be his last, time in New York. And he has plans to go to sort of like a camp with his friends. But at this point, Betty, his mother, Oma, she is feeling, lonely. She's a widow now. Her blood pressure, she would tell you, Blutdruck was very high. And she was supposed to go on a vacation to get a little break with her friend Bertel Dingfelder. And she really didn't have many friends. And Bertel was not a close friend like your mom and I. She had many friends, and she decided at the last minute she didn't want to go with Betty. She had something better to do. So there was Betty, and so she insisted that she called him, his German name was Hans, and she called him Hansel, that Hansel was to go with her after he was going to be leaving, so at least he should go with her on this vacation. And he was very, very obedient to his mother. And he thought, well, he'll go, and his friends were going to be nearby, so he would see his friends. So we both arrive at, it's Sunday, August 28th, 1949. Bubby and I have dinner, and then everybody goes and sits out on, it's a house with a porch, basically, not a fancy hotel. And we go and sit on the porch, and there are all these Germans, sort of Betty's age, in their 50s. To me, that was like 100. And they're talking German, and they're all worked up about it. And they're talking about the eastern side, the Eastern Jewish side of the Catskills, and the German side of the Catskills, and the German side is better, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there, and I'm so angry, and I'm thinking, why am I here? I'm going to have a week of this. And then all of a sudden, this young man appears before me, and I'm sitting on a chair, and he's about this distance, leaning on the porch railing, smiling at me, and he says, "It's like a civil war." So we start to talk, and I think he looked very young. I thought he was a high school kid, so I wasn't thinking of him in that way until he told me that he was about to go to graduate school. Oh, and then he said to me, "Would you like to go rowing tomorrow?" Oh, yes. And that was the beginning. And he loved rowing. And was so happy to be a place where he could go rowing. I had hardly ever gone rowing, and there was a little lake nearby that they called. Everything was very pretentious. The Palace Hotel, and this was little Lake Switzerland. So we went rowing.
While this is going on, Bubby and Oma are in the background. What's going on with the mothers?
Well, the mothers were very ill-suited for each other, but they were sort of pushed to be together because we were taking off all the time, which was not their plan. So what they would do, like we would go to Lake Switzerland, and they would follow behind us.
They were chaperoning.
Yes, I mean, they kept a distance, but they followed behind us. And then they would sit on a bench as we rowed. There were big hotels in that area, like Grossinger's, the famous hotels. And each one of them had a night where guests could come, not have to pay to see the show, that you'd pay for drinks, but not, So he figured out which hotel was free every night. And every night we went to a hotel and we went dancing. So we were able to escape and also have a very good time. And it was the first time that I drank anything alcoholic, like a grown-up. By Tuesday, one of the girls who was obviously very interested in him, Hilda, came to see him. And I was very anxious about what was going to happen about that. And I went up to my room and pouted. And then Bubby came up smiling and said to me, "She's gone."
Oh.
So he sent her away.
So Bubby was pro-Henry.
She was She was very charmed by him. I think she saw in him someone very connecting and European and an addition to her life. He was not intimidating to her at all.
Oma couldn't have thought of you too positively because she wouldn't want you to take her son away, right?
Oh, absolutely not. But the rule was, which he lived by at that time, was that whoever he married, she was going to live with them. That was the condition of the marriage, and that's what he told me.
And do you remember thinking like, no thanks?
I was, I got a pain in my stomach right now. And I was very nervous about it. And I didn't right away say that that's not something I would do. But as it got serious, I did indicate that I didn't want to do that. The unfortunate thing was he was going to graduate school. She wasn't going to move to North Carolina. So it was going to be after he finished and got his degree, which was years ahead. So we didn't have to, deal with it immediately. At his very best, he was extraordinary, I think, in his ability to really connect with people, and with quite a range of people, and to really get a sense of who you are and to convey who he is. And I remember the moment, I don't know what we were saying, but we were in the rowboat on Lake Switzerland, and I was sitting, as a passenger, and he had stopped the boat, and we were talking, and I had this moment when I fell in love. And I fell in love with him because I felt there was something that he said and the way he responded to what I said, that he got me in ways that people had not gotten me. And for me, I think that American boys were too American for me. I liked it that he was European and that he had this, much deeper understanding of a world that in some way I also connected to. And he was a refugee and also felt alien, and I got that.
Your father could not have been thrilled with him at first.
At first, not, but as he got to know him, they were like, Dad wanted a father, my father wanted a son, and they found each other. They were very, very connected. But my father was very upset that I was moving away. Also, and initially he was unhappy when he realized it was serious that I was marrying a German Jew. I was marrying outside the tribe. And he said, why can't you marry an American, meaning an American born of Eastern Jewish heritage.
You mentioned that at the Catskills there was this civil war. Were you repelled at all by German Jewish culture?
Yes. I still am, in some ways. But in some ways I'm very admiring, certainly what they went through and how they, what they made of themselves, and their caring for family, for community. There are many things that are positive. But there is a rigidity, a certain lack of lightness, of humor that is so profound in Yiddishkeit, and of being condescending and supercilious to anybody who was not the way you were supposed to be or the way they were, that I find difficult.
When you guys got married, did you really know each other?
No. I mean, he 2 weeks after we met, he left for Biloxi, Mississippi, where he was doing an internship. No, first he went to Chapel Hill, First he went to Chapel Hill. So he did return for what was then Armistice Day and then again Thanksgiving. And he didn't have a car. He didn't have money. He hitchhiked 500 miles. This was to see me. I mean, this was the devotion. And then he said, I can't keep doing this. So we decided, okay, we'll have to get married. It's the only way. So we got engaged on Christmas. I did not see him again in person. We didn't have telephones, just letters. Didn't see him again until I think April. He came up briefly. We planned the marriage, and then he came up 4 days before the marriage. So of course I didn't know him. We're both trying to escape, and we don't really acknowledge that we are two prisoners trying to escape. Very dominating, controlling mothers, and that we have found in each other a way to do that.
So you guys got married at Burnside
Manor in the Bronx, which was what they, sort of like a wedding.
A wedding mill.
A wedding mill, exactly. Yeah. I didn't even go to, I didn't even know anything about Burnside Manor. It was chosen by my father and Bubby, and they made all the arrangements. My father calls me from Burnside Manor and said, would you change your mind? No. We have a
Why did he say that? Why did?
Because he didn't want me to leave.
Yeah.
And I can see why. I was leaving him alone with Bubby. And then the rabbi, unlike our rabbi here who gets to know you and all of that, he was, one of these central casting. And I remember standing under the chuppah, and he's saying the prayers and whatnot, and I'm feeling so distant from the whole experience. It's very strange. And then he says, and after we, he breaks the glass and we do all that, he says, and I now pronounce you man and wife according to the laws of the state of New York. Boom. But, we're going to, it's a fairly alien world in the South. Well, initially it wasn't that easy because, there I was, an absolute alien in Mississippi of all places. And I had no connections to anybody except Dad, except eventually I did get a babysitting job. So, and then we went to Chapel Hill. But it was the beginning, and it took years. Dad was an extremely connecting person, as you know. I mean, he could be disconnecting too, but he was very connecting in many ways. So we developed a world of friends, beginning in graduate school, people like us who were, separated. Some of them came from other countries, other worlds, and were looking for community. And together, over the years, we formed friendships together that helped me to understand who I was. Writing involves a lot of reflection, and that's what I love about it. That I think before I do the writing, I think about what I want to say in ways I ordinarily wouldn't. And, I put things together, like, say, understanding Bubby in ways I did not understand her when I was angry and hurt and all of the above.
Thinking about it from her point of view.
Yes, I would, and the writing, because I do it, and now I'm 91 and I'm continuing to do it, I feel it helps me to grow and understand things. It continues to do that. I would say that after my mother died, I basically lost my voice. And eventually I was governed by Bubby's voice, or I had to be very silent. It took many years for me to really understand, and there were crucial events, certainly marrying Dad, that helped me to get started. And I did go into therapy, which helped to some extent, but it was not the greatest therapy. Certainly friends helped me, and certainly my family, my children, and definitely going to social work school, becoming a therapist, and having friends who were therapists who were able to talk and listen at deep levels, and the writing. So it's been, yeah. And I feel I'm continuing to do that, and it's of great importance to me because I know that my children and grandchildren, and hopefully grandchildren, are reading what I write, and so that I can pass on to them my history, the history of our family. And that was something that I so lacked in my own life, knowing the family history. And I think that's very important in terms of, for especially the younger generation, understanding what they came from, and that I think they have the deep values of this family, of caring for others, of community, of understanding history.
Take a few pictures amongst the three of us, still pictures.
On what, your iPhone?
Yeah, on the iPhone.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of clear shots, and then you're good. Okay, why the big pisk? Okay.
I'm not even saying a word, and I have a big piss.
Yeah, you got a big pisk on. You can see it on your face. You're sitting there where you have two. If you don't mind my saying so, nice, handsome young men giving you all this attention, and you have that mug on your face. What is up with that?
I would like to remind you
Yeah.
that I am 91 years old.
You're
And when you're 91 years old, you're not going to have the energy that you have now. And you might have two gorgeous, lovely young women like Ellen with who knows who,
I like the story.
sitting there eagerly waiting to do
knew
something
every
with
word.
you, film you or interview you or whatever Ellen is going to do.
We
And
should
you're
be
going to
so
be
lucky.
feeling this utter fatigue, and you're going to have a punim, and Ellen is going to yell at you.
Of course.
And how do you think that's going to feel?
Very good. That's what I trained her to do.